I'm building the corporate Australia that I always crave for.
I'd say the biggest gamble I can think of is my grandma, who's now passed away, who took her 15-year-old son and 16-year-old grandson, sewed gold into their clothes and put them on the boat in the middle of the night and said, go, because anywhere is better than here. I always thought, for a big chunk of my life, at least as a teenager turning into an adult, I thought, you know what, I've got to make the best of the opportunities my parents gave me.
So my report card was always Gopi can do great things in life if you just applied himself. I think the big thing is the no ego. I think just being able to leave the ego at the door and kind of walk in and take the idea for the face value as it is, giving people the room to be themselves.
And it wasn't until a little bit later that I actually understood, it's like, actually, the thing that my parents care about is me being happy.
Welcome to another exciting episode of the Mastering Podcast. I'm your host, Magnus Olson, and joining me today is, again, my favourite co-host, Don the Powerhouse Sanka. How are you, mate?
Good, mate. Good to be your sole favourite today because the others are not here.
All right, today we're joined by two men who just don't talk about the future, they're building it. Dr. Vu Tran is a doctor, founder, entrepreneur and business leader operating at the intersection of medicine, technology and AI. From healthcare innovation to national defence and data, Vu is focused on one thing, helping Australia think bigger and move faster in a world that's changing at speed. Gopi Sara, he's an entrepreneur forged through the immigrant journey. He's considered an expert in startups and heavily involved in high-stakes business growth. He understands risk, resilience, and what it takes to build something from nothing in a competitive space. Together, they bring lived experience across health, technology, enterprise, and the future of work. This will be a conversation of what it truly means to master the modern world. Welcome, boys.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Love the intro.
Man, that intro sounds like we're about to get in the ring and go for a fight, right? Do you have to add in our weight and height as part of that as well? It feels like there's not much missing.
Ready to rumble.
We'll leave that to the editor.
Mate, I've got to say, you actually underdid that because I've known these guys for years. And when we were putting this thing together, I just wanted to think, what are they masters of? And I was like, I can't pinpoint, but one thing that I came to is there's a lot of people who call themselves futurist.
Can I just add to that? Because I reckon these blokes are the Australian version of the PayPal mafia. What do you think about that?
We're pretty close, pretty close. Once you start hearing more about the Go On story and the whole journey, I think we're pretty close on that one. So let's dive in.
No, it's very kind. I think for me, it's like definitely not a futurist. We talk about this a lot over the years, which is you see the stepping stones, and I think you just follow the stepping stones, and sometimes it leads to a place where you always know progress you push forward. So it's always going to lead you to a better place. But there are other people out there who are predicting what the future is going to look like, and that's definitely not me.
Definitely not me either. For me, actually, the principle is I don't know what the future is going to look like. I don't have a crystal ball. If I did have a crystal ball, I wouldn't be sitting here with you guys, right? I would have had the lotto tickets from last night or something like that. So I appreciate the introduction, but I think, my 2 cents is if we think too far ahead, we don't think about the present. And a lot of the time that's what we miss. If we spoke about tangents before this kicked off. The tangent I'll bring back to is that mindfulness is something that's really, really important. But if you zoom right out, looking at that in terms of going, a lot of people think it's too far ahead or too far back. They don't think about what's in front of them. And I think one thing that we're really good at as entrepreneurs is dealing with what's in front of us. Because you can think about strategy all you want, but execution's a big part of it. So I know you're talking about being a futurist and all these things, which is great. But I think the trick that a lot of us miss is like dealing with what's in front of us. That's a really big part of it. And I think that's why Gopi and I get along really well.
Yeah.
Because it's around just executing, right?
And it's also like the time and the place, right? We do take time to sometimes have like an hour and a half conversation and where we just, bounce around where the future is, where the trend is and things like that. But that's definitely like, once a month, once a quarter kind of thing, not every single day. Every single day is just solving the problem at hand.
Anyone can predict the future, right? But to action on an idea and make it work, and that's
I disagree, mate. Who can predict the future?
No, this is a good one. Actually, I think
anyone can predict the future.
Attempt to predict.
Yeah, I think Don's point is pretty good, which is like I think anyone can have a view on the future.
Well, I think that's a better definition of it.
And then but actually put chips on the table and to have a bet on it, which involves sweat, time, blood, energy, etc. yeah, that definitely does test you, because if it doesn't play out, you kind of walk away empty-handed.
Let's kick off. My first question is, do immigrants make better entrepreneurs?
I'll let Vu take this one. He's got a really good view on this.
Look, I'm not going to say immigrants make better entrepreneurs, but I'll talk about the selection bias that exists with immigrants, right? So I'm the child of Vietnamese immigrants. I was born here 10 years after my parents arrived in Australia. So incredibly privileged life compared to my siblings who are 10, 12 and 14 years older than me. So they came across on a boat with mum and dad, as an example, and fled Vietnam. My dad used to always tell me that the Steve Jobs of his generation fled Vietnam after the war, because the selection bias that exists for migrants, in particular refugees, just think about it. The ones that are willing to take a risk, take a bet, to gamble, to jump on a boat like my parents did with their 3 kids under the age of 5, go to God knows where to escape God knows what, right? And so if you think about it, and where I see this is I think about my dad compared to my uncle who stayed in Vietnam, right? 2 brothers, not that far in difference in age. My uncle who stayed in Vietnam worked in the same job his entire life. My dad arrived in Australia, started a business, started a sewing factory, started a convenience store, all these different sorts of things, right? And I think that bias, that selection bias that occurs a lot with migrants and with immigrants, is that sort of that risk-taking profile. I wouldn't say they're gamblers. I'd say the biggest gambler I can think of is my grandma, who's now passed away, who took her 15-year-old son and 16-year-old grandson, sewed gold into their clothes and put them on the boat in the middle of the night and said, go, because anywhere is better than here. Right? That's the story that I grew up with as a kid, because they were the first ones to leave Vietnam before the rest of my family fled. And I think about it going, man, grandma was a real hustler. She was the one who was sitting there going, I want to be able to. She's taking a calculated risk, right? She's weighing up the pros and cons. But as Gopi said earlier when we were talking about this, like, it's one to be able to have a view on the future. It's another one to then act on it and have conviction behind that. So, in a nutshell, when I think about sort of migrants and that propensity that they have towards being entrepreneurs, the selection bias is the migrant who has come to Australia, say, for example, as a refugee, is already probably a risk taker by nature. And if I think about my childhood growing up as a kid, people will go, did you have tiger parents, right? Like, your typical Asian parent who kind of wants you to be a straight A student and all that stuff. My parents did not know a single grade that I had throughout all of primary school and high school. Oh, wow. Right? Not a single grade. They did not look at.
Speaking of those grades, what was a typical comment that was written on your report cards by your teachers growing up?
I don't know. It would. So honestly, it would have just been that I was probably a very combative kid growing up, but I always got great grades, right? So I do remember my grade 5 teacher coming up and saying, "Hey, are you okay with your report card?" I do remember that distinctly, right? Mrs. Dingle, she was very, very lovely, but I do remember that was when I used to duke it out with her on a whole bunch of different things. But I got good grades and had great teachers. But going back to it, my parents, I always thought, for a big chunk of my life, at least as a teenager turning into an adult, I thought, you know what, I've got to make the best of the opportunities my parents gave me. And it wasn't until a little bit later that I actually understood, it's like, actually, the thing that my parents care about is me being happy, because being alive, having a roof over my head and being fed was like the gold medal for them. Anything beyond that was cream, right? So I don't know, I'm coming back to it and I'd go, I wouldn't say migrants make better entrepreneurs. I don't think that's fair, right? I think it's saying that there's a selection bias there where migrants and those who take risks are more likely to have a greater propensity to be entrepreneurs. And I grew up in a household where it was normal for all the aunties and uncles to own a business, a bakery, a restaurant, a convenience store, right? So for me growing up as a kid, when I went to Andrew, who I started Go One with, and said, hey, let's register an ABN and start selling websites in grade 11 and 12 when everyone else got a job at Woolies and Coles. That wasn't abnormal. I look back on it now and I go, that's abnormal. Yeah. But back then that was just super, super normal. So it's a long-winded answer to say I don't think that they're better. Migrants are better. I think there's just a selection bias in terms of the type of people who migrate in the first place.
And this is something we've talked about a lot, in the sense that, like, I haven't formed a view on this question, right? Because my background is I came to Australia as a refugee. I was and I didn't make the decision. Mum and dad did, right?
How old were you when you came?
11. So mum and dad, were Sri Lankans, never been in Sri Lanka, always kind of was around other places. War was going at the time and they wanted a better future for my sister and I. So they decided to come to Australia. My dad got separated from us while we were coming here. So he was stuck in Singapore for almost 12 years. So last time I saw my dad was 11 and I saw him again when I was 22. But my parents, came here and, we talk about this thing a lot, which is around when you have generations, you have one generation that's a farmer, next generation is a worker, and the next generation is a poet. You have to decide which generation are you. And I feel I'm fortunate to be the poet generation because of the sacrifices my parents made. That I don't think that drove me to become an entrepreneur. I think it was just that I don't think it kind of instilled the risk taking. It was just more that maybe the people around me, the environment, seeing my cousins do a bunch of things, et cetera, it kind of made me want to go, I wanted that. Or it could be that I came through corporate Australia and I just hated corporate Australia so much. It could literally be that I just went and saw an environment that I was like, I can't work in that place anymore. I've got to go and build my own environment. And, it comes through that. But it is definitely a case of like, it's really hard to pinpoint the characteristics.
Can I rephrase that in a different way? By the way, interesting, Gopi and I both came from Sri Lanka. I migrated under different circumstances and we were probably on the opposite side of that war.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And, we all migrated at some point or the result of migration and under different circumstances, right? Do you think that as migrants, because of the circumstances and the way we have to face challenges, we become harder workers? Do we put in more? Do we push through barriers?
I'll just make. I liked when you were talking about that you came over on a boat, because there's that saying that we've all heard that if you want to succeed in something, you've got to burn the boats. Mm-hmm. And I think a little bit of that analogy can play true. That your parents have come here, they've come with absolutely nothing. They've got no choice but to make this work.
There's no turning back.
There's no turning back.
That's right. And I think that's why like being in that situation. So coming here as a refugee, had no money growing up, because we were refugees as well, we couldn't work and things like that. So we had to find ways to have money because dad was stuck overseas. So my sister and I started a tutoring business when we were like 15 years old. And so we used to tutor kids in the area and stuff like that. Kids found out. And before we know it, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, we were just back-to-back tutoring for like 12 hours a day. And that kind of created like the income for us to kind of survive. And so sometimes pressure creates an environment where you find a solution.
Forced.
But then I think it's really interesting is when you come later in life and you have the money and things like that, and then you go to take the punishment of becoming a business owner, of founding something, that speaks are quite different. And I think what bridges the gap is if you're early on and if you're lucky enough to find a little bit of success, it becomes addictive. And then all of a sudden, because I was a C average student at school, right? I was smart, but I never applied myself. And my report card was always Gopi can do great things in life if you just applied himself. And so I from an OP ranking perspective, I think I got like OP 7, which is like, top 20%, but like definitely not like OP1 or OP2 that, most Sri Lankan or, Asian kids kind of get. When I went into university, my first semester, I got straight HDs and I just went, whoa. And then my whole uni degree became about protecting the record. It was like, I would never let anything get in the way of, and so sometimes there's a little bit of luck involved where your knowledge, your intelligence, your capability, the exam in front of you, the opportunity in front of you just collide. And then as soon as you feel that, this is on, then I reckon since that was 17 to now, it's all been about like protecting that record, building on that excellence, etc.
I think that's such a really good point because what I take away from what you're saying there is also that little bit of self-belief as well. Of going, not only, people will say, can I do it? Okay, now that I've done it, it's like, okay, what more can I do?
What more can I do?
What other opportunities exist there? Which is so powerful because I think as I said, I was very lucky in that I met Andrew, who's our co-founder at 1MRI, very early on in high school. We were good mates from high school. We did every subject together bar one. I did biology, he did economics. So he went on to become an economist, I went on to become a doctor, right? That was the only difference between us. And what was really interesting is if I think back on it, it was this sort of being fortunate enough to meet other people like Gopi, like Andrew, who kind of view things as an opportunity rather than a liability. It's not what can I lose, but like what can I gain and what does that look like as well? And that sort of upside sort of mindset is something that also I don't think is very common, because you do meet a lot of people in different circumstances where they'll sit there and I see it all the time as a doctor, right? When I think about my other friends who I went through medical school with, right? And a lot of them now have the sunk cost fallacy of having spent 15, 20 years of training, right? This is post, one of my friends, she's a neurosurgeon, so literally a brain surgeon, and she's finishing her training this year. We graduated uni in 2011. So she's done 15 years of extra training on top of her 5-year medical degree, so 20 years of study to become a neurosurgeon, right? So for her to sort of give up her training, in inverted commas, to go and start something new, I wouldn't do that if I've done 20 years. Like it's really, really hard. But I do want to touch on something, Gopi, that, and I hope you don't mind me getting you to share this, but I remember when you were about to have your second child.
Yeah.
And I was like, dude, get a Snoo. I don't know if you guys know what a Snoo is, but get a Snoo. Yeah. It is the bomb, right? Get a Snoo.
Share what is a Snoo.
So a Snoo is like a cradle that you can tuck your newborn baby into, and using an algorithm, it'll work out the type of rocking that it needs to get your child to sleep. So as a parent, you're used to picking up your kid and you know exactly how to pat them and rock them to get to the sleep. Well, this you strap your kid into and it'll keep adjusting the white noise and the movement to work out what your kid likes. And then once it does that, it'll get used to it and then it'll put your child to sleep. And it's amazing, right? Yeah. So Gopi was about to have his second child. I said, dude, I'll give you some advice because I had my second child. You should get what's called a Snoo. And so what Gopi said to me is, oh yeah, I know what a Snoo is. Do you want to explain?
Yeah, so when we had our first child, we bought a Snoo, and then from time to time they go on for sale. And so it was like, it was around Black Friday, you can get like 30% off. I bought a ton of them. And then you just
turned to me and he said like, I've got like 30 Snoos. And I was like, wait, what? And
so we used to run a website called like rentasnoo.com.au. And so it's like, you can't buy sleep, but you can rent a Snoo. And you just rent these out for like $50 a week. They pay back within 3 or 4 months. And it was one of those things, I learned a lot from this experience. I mean, I've always been hustling. So, from the age of 15, 14, 15, when we started that tutoring business, always, running businesses, doing things, etc. And what's really interesting being here today, going through all that journey is, having the hustle mindset's good, but having the mindset to play big is even better. So the time, like I remember, so running the Snoo business, it was quite good. And, I got busy with work. So my wife, I was like, hey, can you just like sort this business out? And like, it was making like maybe $1.5 grand, $2,000 a week. And my wife was like, yep, I'll take it over and stuff. And one day I came back and there was like 6 or 7 Snoos lying around. And I was like, what's going on? Like my utilization was like 95%, right? She's like, dude, I could just go work for a day and pay you $2,000. Like, I don't need to like handle all these people and stuff. And then it kind of clicked is like, she's kind of right? Like there's this thing of like the hustle mentality is good, but truly go after your potential. And, it was really interesting when one of my friends asked me 6-8 months ago why, because before 1MRI, I was an investor in a company called OfferFit. I kind of helped them, grow quite quickly. OfferFit got acquired. And so there was a really nice windfall that came in that allowed me to do a bunch of things that I wanted to do. And one of the things I wanted to do since I was a little kid was play golf. I could never afford it when I was young. And then later in life, I just never had a time. And so I was going to I signed up to Indooroopilly Golf Club, which is quite expensive. I got a full-time coach and I was like, spend the next couple of years playing golf.
That's where all of our lunches and coffees.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, exactly.
Cold.
How old were you then?
Oh, this was just 2 years ago.
2 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah. And my friend Lon was like, hey, what made you take the risk to go do this? Because the other thing is I could have also just stayed at OfferFit and it would have been paid quite well, etc. And I was like, what do you mean? He goes, oh, like it's a big financial risk, etc. And I was like, oh man, I never saw it as the financial risk. Like until Lon asked me about it, it actually didn't click. for me, it was like, dude, to spend time with people like Vu who think big picture and allow me to kind of get off this Snoo business, ideas to like much bigger opportunities. That's kind of where I want to be. And so sometimes, when we ask the question, do immigrants make great entrepreneurs because they're risk-taking appetite? It could just be that immigrants are just always seeking better opportunities, always looking for more. And it's not they never satisfy the Maslow hierarchy of needs. When life is, 8 out of 10, they kind of go, why is it not 10 out of 10? Like, what more can I do to get 10 out of 10?
Or is it because everything's not there lined up for you? So you got to find ways to get around and find solutions.
Yeah.
I think that has a lot to do with it, because we have to be inventive and creative
I often get asked about sort of Australia's innovation ecosystem. Like, why aren't we able to do what Silicon Valley does or what other sort of countries do? The paradox is that because we're the lucky country, we also have this feeling of we have a lot more to lose to an extent as well, right? Similar to what I was saying in terms of my friends who are doctors now, have done decades of training, and the ability to take a risk. They're moving from a much higher base. But I think in general as a society, we actually have a much higher base. And so if you ask my parents, they go, you have an amazing safety net where you can take that risk. But the flip side of that exact same coin is someone saying, hey, we've got this amazing safety net. I don't want to bugger it up, right? As an individual. And that in itself, you would have experienced that and seen that in the corporate world as right.
Yeah, totally. Right? And I think, again, it goes back to luck. If you're lucky enough that you have a true north in life, that aligns, that you actually, resonate with, internalize, you have great self-awareness, and it aligns with what we're talking about today, the world's your oyster, right? Like, my true north in life is all about building relationship and learning and pushing the envelope, etc. And so, like, when Vu and I met, the first couple of years was us getting together quarterly and just talking about life. Vu would talk about, we would share concepts of like what our values are and how we use values as our concept in life, and how life gives you stepping stones and you've got to step on these stones, but you kind of need to know where your true north is. And so mine was always about building relationship. And so when he pinged me about One MRI, I was sitting there going, I go out of my way to have coffee and lunch with Vu and Andrew once a quarter. What it would be like to just hang out with these guys every single day. And sometimes when things get really tough, when you're building a business, you get into the depth of desperation or despair.
Yeah, Elon Musk calls it chewing glass and staring into the abyss, right? The world of being a founder.
Yeah, like that moment of anxiety and stress, and then that big picture allows you to take a step back, and everything else doesn't matter. You go like, what really is important is the fun we're having on this journey. And then we'll start chatting, and then all of a sudden it's like all the day-to-day stuff kind of dissipates, and you get a better clarity. You tackle what's in front of you. But I reckon it's a lot to do with luck, a lot to do with people around you, having these conversations, allowing you to truly tap into what you want to get out of life.
But you create that luck, right? And I've got to back you up on that. Like, I love the conversations we have, and you guys are never not available to people. Whenever they reach out to you, you're there for a coffee or lunch or whatever it is. One thing I've always noticed is if I've ever caught up with Vu or Gopi, whether it's a business meeting or a catch up as mates for a coffee or lunch, I've actually never walked away not learning something new. And I think
it's very kind. Thank you.
That's huge.
It's not intentional.
Can I just ask you to expand on, because I love what you said about values, and as I've gotten older, that's been supremely important for me, and any business relationship that I'll get into has to be founded on those values. And off the back of that, then everything else seems to have a flow. So do you mind expanding on that? And would you share your values?
Yeah, I'll share mine with the caveat that this is going to make me sound very egotistic and narcissist, but with that on the table. So my values are pretty simple. And I went through a journey in life where, came to Australia as a refugee, didn't have much money growing up, etc. Mum and dad never had a home. And so they always rented. And then my sister and I had a conversation when we were like 17. We were like, hey, the biggest liability, and it's going to sound really bad, the biggest liability in our life is going to be our parents, where we can't get to do the things we want to do because we always have to look after them, etc. One of the things we could do is get them a house, get them sorted out. And so at the age of 20, my sister was 21, graduated first job, we bought a house for like, $500,000 and we were getting paid $5,000 a month. And, our mortgage repayments was like $3,000 each or something like that. And so the next probably that was 2011 to 2017, the next 6 years of my life was all about paying down the house. So I worked in engineering and realized engineering didn't pay that well. And I was like, what's the next best paying job? Probably in finance. And I was like, oh, McKinsey pays really well. So I went to McKinsey and, it was all about paying down the house. And in 2017, we paid down the house. And I remember we were at 2 a.m. at a bank doing some work. And I was just like, why am I doing this? Right? Like, I don't need to do this anymore. I've paid off the house. I could do whatever I wanted. And I could do anything I wanted. And then all of a sudden I realized I actually don't know what to do in life. Like, I've had this one siloed view. I actually didn't even know what I enjoyed. I didn't even know what my value was, etc. And I went into depression. I like really struggled. I had to take 6 months off work. I couldn't function. And I did a bunch of wild things. I did like 10-day Vipassana retreat. So 10 days, not talking to anyone, silent meditation, 10 hours meditation per day. I maybe meditated 10 minutes my whole life and went full deep into this. I did like wilderness walks, etc. And through that, I discovered what my values were. And it's really important to say that I'm saying this to you, and this could be just me just saying something that allows me to feel better. This could be complete BS, or this could be true. I don't know. So my values, what it turned out to be was autonomy. So being able to do this, this is a weekday, we're doing this, like not to be able to be like, oh, I can't take time off work, etc. I really wanted flexibility. Second thing was autonomy. So coming up with the goal and then having the freedom to execute versus having someone who steps it out. Working with great people that when we're 60 years old, we're hanging around the campfire and we're sharing stories of the battle scars, etc. And you work with all these people that in the end, you all become lifelong friends. Doing cool work, looking back and being able to brag to my grandkids about all the different stuffs that I've done. And the last one is making good money today that allows us to go on holidays and a couple other things, but having the shot at making life-changing money. And so these things became probably from 2017 to now, everything that I've done in life more or less fits these things. And as opportunities popped up, like some would resonate louder. So when the One MRI opportunity popped up, it was like definitely resonated more in terms of the people and the type of work and the financial outcome, a little bit less around flexibility and autonomy, because as a founder, that gets kind of taken away.
I remember the conversations for the last 4 years or so, every conversation. I think when I've lost my true north as well, you bring it back saying, this is why you want to do it. And this is, why we're doing it. I even remember when you first started thinking about OfferFit. That whole process of deciding how you wanted to do it and what you wanted to do with that business. You actually applied all of that. And that's how you've come to most of your decisions. So I've got to say, the fact that you've been able to stick to that true north has been really good to watch. And I think some of the success that you've had in life is because you've always had your eye on the ball. Vu, what's your...
I'll keep it really simple. Life's too short to work with dickheads. Like, just to keep it really simple, right? Like, at the end of the day, what it really comes back to is, Gopi was saying before, working with people you want to work with is super important. I've worked with both of you before, right? And so you get that that's what's really important to me. I've got a firm belief that, like, doing whatever it may be that we do will be successful in some way or form. So if you believe that you're going to be successful, then the answer is just who do you want to go on that journey with, right? Like, one of the best things, and it's kind of related, it's not so much a values piece, but to orientate you in terms of sort of the luck that I've had is I've got an older brother who's 10 years older than me, right? Vin, he's a general practitioner. I've always looked up to him. He's sort of been my idol since I was a kid, right? And when I was 15, 16, getting ready to choose my subjects for year 11 and 12, which back then feels like you're choosing the bearing of what job you're going to have, and what job you're going to have is pretty much going to dictate the next 45 years of your life as a 16-year-old. One thing he said to me, which he will never remember saying to me, but I remember it because it sticks with me to this day, he said, Vu, you're going to be successful at anything you do. So do whatever the hell you want. And that's that to a 16-year-old kid is huge, right? Especially when it comes from someone that you really look up to and admire.
It's got goosebumps. That reminds me, my mum used to say that to me, is whatever you put your mind to, you can do. And I think like you said, as a kid, that's powerful.
Well, because then you turn that and flip it on its head and saying, okay, cool. So now what do I want to do? Because if all roads lead to success, whatever success is defined as, then the answer is going, well, okay, how do I cook this in a way that I'm actually going to enjoy it, right? And so that principle has always come back to working with people I love working with, right? And that's super, super important. So if I say to you, Don, no matter what you do, what business you start or what you do, you're going to be successful, then you're going to be like, you know what, I'm going to pick and choose the right people to go on this journey with, right? Because that for me is it's a bit of a weird way to look at it. It's not I guess a bit about self-belief. It's this idea of like, if you believe this is what's going to occur, then how do you kind of make sure that journey is a bit that you want? Like Gopi and you introduced me this concept of we're in our mid-60s, we're sitting around a campfire and the people are sitting around with us and we're talking to them, right? Who are those people? And who are those people we've built relationships with over the preceding 30 to 40 years? And we talk about that from the investors we talk to, the customers we work with, the people we employ. Like that campfire analogy you mentioned before, which you and I talk about all the time and you introduced me to, is kind of a really important principle of like what sort of people do you want to work with and therefore what sort of business do you want to operate.
Yep. Let's talk about mistakes, because I think that's one of the things that defines us. And I know through my own personal journey, and I know some couple of young blokes at the moment, they've had a great deal of success. They're not even hit mid-20s yet, but they haven't gone through the fire. They haven't gone through the storm. And I think that is a real character defining moment. Do you guys mind sharing the biggest mistake that you've made and what you learned from it?
Oh man, there's too many.
That's why I said the biggest one.
Oh, look, I think if I look back at it and if I use sort of, because we're still on the One MRI journey, right? But if I think about Go One, which for me is like a really great and like sort of big first chapter or first act of kind of my professional, like my adult life actually, because started doing Go One with Andrew when we were 16, what eventually became Go One, and 37 this year.
Maybe, do you mind just briefly explaining to our listeners what is Go One?
Yeah.
Actually, I wouldn't mind, I was part of that journey, but I wouldn't mind you telling us about that journey, because that's, I think, one of the most inspirational stories to come out of Australia, let alone Brisbane, from a small town in Logan.
I'll keep it brief, but ultimately, the way I like to describe Go One to people is think of us as the Spotify for workplace learning. What we do is we aggregate training from all across the world from a whole bunch of different providers, about 100,000 courses, put them all into one location and make them available to workplaces. So a B2B business, right? And you worked in our B2B team, Don, and we're very fortunate in that we didn't start out going, you know what, as 16-year-olds, we said, we are going to be the Spotify for workplace learning. We didn't do that at all. We started off just building websites and building apps. We knew two things. One, we wanted to work in technology, and two, we wanted to work with each other. That was it. Everything else kind of came second. Along the way, we built, throughout high school and university, we built a professional services business, building websites, building applications for people. And then we got to a stage where post-GFC, you guys remember GFC didn't really hit us in Australia until really 2010, 11. Even though it's 2008, we didn't feel it until that point. And so that's when people stopped buying websites, buying apps, and they just kind of, their budgets just kind of stretched a lot more, right? And I remember getting to that crunch point and Andrew calling us together and saying, we need to jettison our business. I was going, wait, what? And, we'd spent years building this up. We had a team of about 15 people. It was painful, but we're still building something. It was our identity, a big part of our identity. And he said, look, we don't own any of the stuff we make. And if we were to look back on this in 10, 15, 20 years time, would we look back on it and go, the stuff we did was awesome. The stuff we did was great. This is very similar to the stuff you're talking about that motivated you. And at the time, we had several different little businesses. In fact, we were one of the very first Salesforce implementation companies in Australia. So News Limited and the big banks, whenever they wanted to implement Salesforce, they'd send it to this small little firm. And we used to send a fully loaded bar to the Salesforce sales team every Friday, so they'd send us leads. I don't know if I should say that, but I will, right? And so they used to send us leads. So if you went and bought Salesforce licenses back then, and this is very early on for Salesforce when they just came to Australia, their sales team would be like, well, if you want to implement it, go talk to these boys, right?
And you can't even say it, but like one of the big four banks,
One of
their website.
Exactly. So we built this, we built some really good stuff. And so we had this business that I thought was pretty sizable and pretty good. We weren't making lots of money, but we built something. And Andrew, and you guys both know Andrew, Andrew sees stuff before other people do. And it's something that I will always bring up. He'll see things before they do, and it'll take a while for me to just catch up mentally and go, oh, okay, that's what he meant. And one of the things he said was, he was like, we don't own it. We don't own Salesforce. We don't own the open source system we're building. And none of it is stuff that we kind of be super proud of at the end of the day, right? We're just building stuff for other people. One of the projects we did build for another bank was actually, for National Australia Bank, was something called the Start Counting Program, which was teaching financial literacy to their consumers, especially their lower socioeconomic consumers. And of all the projects we worked on, that was the one we looked at and we go, we love that. We lost a bucket load of money doing it. It was highly unprofitable, right? But I don't know if you guys remember Marie Kondo, the Netflix show where it's like you pick up a sweater and you go, does this bring me joy? And if not, chuck it out. And if it does, keep it. We literally did that with our business units, right? And when we Marie Kondoed the business, what we ended up with was 99% of it was out the door. And the 1% we wanted to keep was the bit that was least profitable, but gave us the most purpose, which was learning. And then so we went and restructured the business and focused on learning and jettisoned a whole bunch of stuff. And then we went through an accelerator called Y Combinator or YC. And then we got in and went through the whole journey of raising a seed round, a pre-seed round, a seed round, a series A, B, C, D. I think all up we raised $300 to $400 million to be able to build the company.
What are you guys worth valued at now?
I have no idea. 2 billion, 2 to 3 billion, something like that, right? Depends where the Australian dollar is at and how people want to value SaaS these days.
I think that was 4.7 billion at one point. So.
But what I'd come back to is not just on the valuation front, but if you think about the sort of what we were able to create, we got up to a stage where we had just under 1,000 staff across 22 countries globally. And we did it all from Southeast Queensland. And what I really learned along that journey was kind of what I do like and what I don't like, right? What I'm not made for is the corporate world, right? I'm not made for optimizing an opt-to-win ratio by an extra 0.5% to bring in an extra 20 million bucks. That's not really on the radar. What I do enjoy is being at the coalface, right? And for us figuring stuff out and building stuff from the early stage, as Gopi likes to say, the 0 to 1 sort of part, I really do enjoy. And so for me, the biggest sort of byproduct of the Go One experience was actually learning a lot about myself and what I do enjoy doing. What I do enjoy doing is working at the early stage, figuring out stuff out from first principles. One thing I'll always say about founders, and you guys, I'm sure you will agree with this, and Gopi hinted at it, as founders, we are all utterly unemployable. Utterly unemployable.
Agree completely.
Yeah. So as a result of that, we create our own jobs, right? We create businesses, roles and opportunities for ourselves, that desire for autonomy that Gopi was talking about before.
I totally agree. Even when you're working for someone, you try to create your own jobs. And that's what I've been doing for the last, since Go One, I guess. And I had my own founder journey, which started 2016. And I don't know if you guys remember or not. I actually, first time I came to that Logan office was to find a learning solution that we couldn't find a solution from anyone else. And someone said to go and talk to these young kids that are doing it. We had to deliver this learning solution to Harvey Norman. And everywhere we went to, they said it's going to take you 3 months and going to cost you about $50,000. We walked into this Logan office above a massage parlor and we were like, where are we going? And I sent my team, I said, I'm not even going up there. I think we're going to waste our time.
You're going to lose a kidney.
and I got a text saying they can do it next week, $10,000.
Yeah.
I'm like, whoa, this is crazy. And fast forward 4 years, I ended up working for these guys. But it starts with one of the biggest things I want to say, ask you as well. For me, when I first met Vu and Andrew, I think the first time, or Chris, that was it. Like you talk to these guys, it was sort of like you want to be part of this. You want to work with these guys. How important is it to have the right people around you at the right time?
100%. Like, Gopi's got this great LinkedIn post where he was talking about how we started 1MRI, and you've posted the WhatsApp chat where I texted you saying, ready to be CEO, right? And you said, always. And it was like, wasn't really sure the exact topic of how we're going to do it. But it was this thing where, and you've known Gopi for a long time as well. Yeah. You meet people and you go, I want to work with you. I don't know how, I don't know when, I don't know where, but you got to find a way, right? And that for me is kind of one of those learnings that I took away from that first experience in Go One. Like, I stepped back officially a year and a half ago. So tell me any other business you can think of where founders have been together as a founding team of four for going on 15 to 20 years. Just doesn't exist, right? And that's where I think a really important part of it is, I go back to that principle of like being able to, if you strongly believe you're going to be successful, then the next step is going, who do you want to enjoy that journey with, right? If you're going to climb that mountain and you know you're going to get to the top, the question is going to go, who do you want to pop champagne with at the top?
But how do you find that timing? Because, Gopi, we've had many conversations. I think you said many times, like, you want to find an opportunity to work with Andrew. Like you were catching up with him every quarter.
Yeah.
And like, how do you find, when is that right time? How do you pick that time? Timings.
No, sometimes it just has to work. I mean, like the way I met Andrew first was to a job interview. So Arn from 1013, I was 2017 actually off the back of, the whole soul searching and stuff. And he was like, hey, why don't you have a chat with Andrew, go on, like it looks pretty interesting. I had a chat with Andrew and it didn't feel right. And so I was like, here's someone I really want to work with, but this doesn't seem like the right setting, etc. But I think that sometimes things just come through and also sometimes you never know how it's going to play out in terms of that working relationship, because this relationship could have never worked out. But last night, I was down at the coast, Saturday night, down at the coast, I was writing a memo of like the future of One MRI and where things are going, etc. And there was a couple of dot points I couldn't get my head around. So I called Andrew and I was like, hey, can we just chat through this really quickly? And then we started talking. Andrew was like, hey, hold up. What are you trying to do? I'm like, I'm just trying to write this memo. It's for myself anyway, but I'm, hopefully we can share with the investors, etc. And then we started bouncing around that memo, etc. Next morning, Andrew sends a memo to us. He's like, hey, I've written something up. And I'm like, oh, cool. This is what and quickly like bouncing off it. And I always admired Amazon's, the whole 6-page memo, writing memo before meetings and stuff like that. And it's pretty cool. I've got two co-founders who also love that. And we write papers before meetings. Yeah. Like you sit down and write long form papers where you actually write out your thought and people read it ahead of time and then you chat about it. And so sometimes it's just luck that, all of that kind of comes together. But I think the big thing is the no ego. 100%. I think just being able to leave the ego at the door and kind of walk in and take the idea for the face value as it is, giving people the room to be themselves. So when Vu calls me, sometimes our conversation is 10 minutes, sometimes our conversation is an hour, but I never kind of go, hey, we're on a shot clock, like we need to wrap it up, just because the faith of where we're going to end up is going to be a much better, bigger, better place. Similar thing with Andrew, when we kind of go into problem solvings and stuff like that, we just give each other the space to be us. And so one of the things about Andrew is that quickly Andrew will get to 3 steps ahead of me than I can be. And so one of the best things I can do in a conversation is take a step back, give Andrew the space to grab onto the wheel, and we'll get to there. And along the way, my input will be heard, etc. But it's quite easy to kind of go, no, like this was my discussion, I'm going to shape it. And that ego kind of like gets in the way of getting a better outcome. And because we're also outcome driven, it's the outcome that only matters. Nothing else matters. Like the process and everything doesn't matter.
And I think it flows down to, you talked about founder groups, lasting for so long. But then you take it from, I joined the journey quite early. There was 5 of us at the end. There was this division that we created. And I don't think any of us have worked at Go One for the last 5 years. But when we finished at Go One, we slowly started this poker game. It started as a dinner once a month, and then it sort of evolved into this poker game. And over the last 5 years, we have not missed a single game or a single catch up. And I've never heard of that. And when I tell people, like we did that as a way to catch up after we left Go One.
And it was, I would say on my part, it was incredibly intentional, because when, people move on and you kind of move out of a business, is this it? Like our reason for being connected was work, right?
Yeah.
And that intentionality of going, well, actually, we work really well as a team. We enjoy spending time with each other. Let's put some intentionality behind that. It really helped, and we're saying this before, that our team's project manager is the guy who coordinates us and pulls us all together, right? But it is that.
I've got to give credit to John. Yeah. John is an amazing project manager.
But again, that poker game, like, it for me, it's a big chunk of going on the journey with people that you would spend time with and generally choose to spend time with. And I do think that, the fact that we do catch up every month with the guys and we do play poker together and we all work together in some way or form at Go One kind of proves to me, at least personally, that
the culture was right.
Well, it was right. And we also had a team of people who are happy to spend time with each other years after we leave that workplace together. Right? That's the really cool part that I enjoy. And I do think, going back to sort of that point you were making before, Gopi, around also that ego piece, right? I think that's one thing that we'll find from a values perspective of all the people that I choose to spend time with, and a lot of them and a lot of them, that's a really common thread. We pick and choose who we get close to and who we don't get close to, right? And that no ego bit or checking, I would say that every single one of us has a very high degree of self-confidence and self-assurance in terms of the fact that we know we're good, we know what we can do, we know what we're good at, but it's not to the point that we're ego-driven. And that is, now that you talk about that, Gopi, that's not an explicit value that I think about, but it's one that if I look at all my relationships, it's a super important one. Don't get me wrong. I know a lot of people who have big egos, but the sphere that they come into contact with me is very far, that orbit is very different to the people who are in the closer orbit, if that makes sense.
Oh, it's 100% good point. I know a lady and she actually runs a group, and we all belong to a similar networking group, I understand. And that is very fixated on what your title is. And when you're in a business environment, most of the time you're always introduced by your title. You're this, or you're a former this. And that comes back to an identity piece. And in a previous life, I ran a large commercial construction company, and I'm a very relationship-driven person. And I'd built a bunch of relationships through that firm. And then after I'd exited, and I'd make a phone call or send a text, hey, mate, you want to have a cup of coffee? All of a sudden, there's no answer. And they were all associated with what I could do as part of that role.
Transactional.
Yeah.
100% transactional. So what this lady does, this group that she runs, and they do it, she calls it a soul table. There's a dozen people that get invited along. As you walk into that room, you're forbidden to talk about what you do or what position you hold. And so people walk in and they go, what am I going to say? And what she says is, just ask the person, what are you passionate about? So all of a sudden you're getting to know that person at a deeper level, and then you can understand there's some common ground, like you start talking about values, for example, or whatever, but it's taking away that the CEO, that other mindset that you're not actually looking at it from a transactional perspective, because again, from some of these networking groups, it's all about, I'm going to go and talk to that bloke because I think that they might be able to do something for me. And it's not, well, I want to actually get to know that person because I've got shared values with that person. So I think that's a really good point. But back on my original question, what's the biggest mistake that you've made?
Yeah, that's right.
I'm glad
I was like, what's the original question?
Let me take this one.
Yeah.
For me, I think it's it's going to sound really small, but the first house we bought was probably one of the biggest mistakes I made. And it was because of the thought process into buying the house. Paid mum and dad's house off in 2017. And then I was like, it's probably a good time to kind of buy the next place. So my wife now, but partner at the time, we were looking for a house, etc. And there's two things I did. One was I bought one which was significantly well within my comfort zone. And the second one was because it was well within my comfort zone, I didn't even transact with the interaction. I didn't even interact with the transaction that much. I bought it without seeing it. I only saw it the day that we got the key and kind of walked in. I was like, oh, wow, this is what we bought. But I think this thing that later on I realized in life, which was never do anything for marginal improvement. It's kind of if you're the transaction cost is just not worth it. And that's from money, time, effort, all of the above. So if you're switching jobs just to switch for a little bit of more money or a little bit of more role, etc., it's just never going to be worth it. Always go for the big thing. And it's just one of those things where just that mistake of not backing myself, seeing the bigger picture, kind of going after it, always stays with me. And that was 2017, a long time ago. There's a couple of pieces in that. One is we were living in an apartment and we bought a house that was exactly the same as our apartment. So we could have just stayed in an apartment. That was the first one. The second one was not looking ahead. So I'm kind of going, hey, we're going to start a family and stuff like that. Where do we want to be, etc. Third one is backing ourselves, kind of going hey, we're going to be good financially. Why don't we just move to the bigger piece? I think this is the bit where being the refugee really hangs on you for a long time. That time of like not having money and really struggling, you're always like, I've just got to make sure that like in a rainy day, I'm going to be okay. And then the rainy day, I'm 37 now, hasn't come yet. And so, like there's a few things in that, but it was that event brought all of those lessons to life. Like it was reflecting back always on that thing. And I still make the same mistakes, in individual formats, but in smaller ways. But that event like really kind of taught me a lot.
What about you, Vu?
I have been sitting here for the last few minutes and I don't want this to come across the wrong way. I can't think explicitly of anything, right? And this is me. Don and Gopi know me well enough that I'm not normally lost for words, but like genuinely as I think about it, I go, gun against my head, what mistakes have I made that, like, what have I done that I really regret? And I'm sure in the moment or in the day or in the month or in the quarter or in the year, I think about it and I go, man, that was a stupid thing to do. But I always, if I look back on these things in hindsight, I go, it was either a learning experience or it wasn't a big deal or it wasn't as existential as I thought it would be, which probably makes me think going, holy cows, what have I done where I've got to sort of pay the piper soon in terms of realizing it was a mistake? It's just I'm a few years away from realizing that.
Or everything you said before has facilitated that, right? The right journey, the right people around you. If things go wrong, you have other people to back you up.
I can look at so many different in my eyes, small things that I've done, which life would be better if I had done them. But I look back and I go, I don't regret any of those things occurring because it gets me to where I am today. I think I've got to, I see a psychologist regularly. I've seen one for a long time to help me understand a bit more about my own head. And I speak to Gopi a lot after a session. I go, hey man, this is what I covered today and this is what I learned. And a big part of it is I feel like in the last few years, one thing I've become relatively, and I'm not always there, relatively more content with right what I said at the start is like dealing with what's in front of me and not thinking too far ahead. And a big chunk of it is if I look back, I go, there's nothing where I go, what's happening in my life today that I wish I did something different that would have changed where I am today. And I go, well, actually, I'm really happy where I am today.
Can I rephrase that question in a different way than for you? Is there anything that you would have done differently?
No, that's what I'm trying to say. Like
anything.
Literally, I've been reframing while Gopi's been buying me time for this conversation.
I understand where you're coming from because I've asked that question in the past to guests and where they're going with their answer is effectively that you are where you are as a consequence of some of the mistakes that you've made. And if you wouldn't have made them, you wouldn't be where you are today.
I'll give you some really superficial examples of going, I held a buttload of NVIDIA before it became what it is today, right? A shitload. And that would be a massive financial windfall today if I didn't offload it. But the flip side that I come back to is I go, I'm okay with that. Like I'm genuinely like, I don't wake up at night and go, man, I wish I didn't sell all that NVIDIA, right? Yeah. On the flip side of it is that so there's a whole bunch of examples like that, but I don't nothing kind of comes to mind that I dwell on.
There's a lot of bad calls in our poker nights that he makes.
Yeah. Bad calls. But I look at it and I go, guess what? Next month we're going to play another poker night. Yeah. I get a hard reset.
But I think, what about things that, so I'll say one of Vu's sayings, and then you tell me what triggered that event. So one of your best things is not sweating the small stuff.
Yep.
How did you learn to not sweat the small stuff?
That is that's good. See, this is why it's good to have someone who knows you really well, right? Yeah. So not sweating the small stuff was the anxiety that I would develop as a founder over things that are in hindsight. You look at it and you go, man, they were inconsequential, or you'll sort them out, right? And the problem is twofold. Thank you for giving me that.
That's all right.
So I'll give you twofold. So one is when you sweat the small stuff and you miss the big ass friggin' problem, right? So that's the first bit that it would come to. You're so worried about the micro, you're missing the macro. You're so worried about what's happening with this customer, you miss the fact that you're missing the entire market and you're fishing in the wrong place, as an example, right? So the don't sweat the small stuff is twofold. One is the amount of anxiety we develop as business owners and founders over things that are minutia. Like the thing I'll often, we'll talk about, we'll go, there's don't sweat the small stuff combined with the world keeps turning, right? So what that means is if I do this thing that I'm stressed about right now, if I get it done, does it move the needle? Okay, it does. If I don't do it, does the world stop turning? And 9 times out of 10, 99 times out of 100, it's like, if I defer this till Monday, the world will keep turning. If I don't deal with this problem this week or this month, the world will keep turning. So the don't sweat the small stuff is actually the personal toll that as founders and business owners, we know where all the bodies are hidden. And in fact, no one's going to drive us. There is no board. There is no shareholder who will drive this business more than we will ourselves, right? So we are our own worst judges. So, the biggest mistake based on what you're prompting me on, which is a really good one, is actually sort of learning to be kinder or not being so unkind to yourself as a founder and being so harsh on yourself because you know where all the flaws are, where all the bodies are hidden, where all the problems are. And then so you sweat that stuff. You don't sleep. You let yourself go physically. You let yourself go mentally. And that takes a toll. So, I'm appreciative of Gopi knowing me and raising that. So the biggest mistake is actually probably not being able to understand where the priorities sit personally and really being able to understand that this business does not survive if I'm not intact, right? And as founders, and I mentioned before, the Elon Musk quote of being a founder is like chewing glass and staring into the abyss. That's off the back of a Jensen Huang, who's the founder of NVIDIA, where he was asked by the guys from the Acquired podcast, given NVIDIA is now a $4 trillion company and the biggest company in the world. And they said to Jensen, knowing what you know today, would you do this again? And guess what his answer was? No. Because as a founder, right, pure ignorance is actually a massive weapon, right? Not knowing how things will play out is a massive weapon. But then as a result of that, sort of knowing that that's actually a weapon and something that you can sometimes embrace is quite useful. So it's a long-winded way of coming back to going, the biggest mistake that I can think of that I make on a regular basis, and again, appreciate Gopi prompting me on this, is overthinking things that don't matter. And there's so many examples of that. I can see you guys are all nodding, right? There's so many examples of that where you kind of look back on it and you go, yeah, man, that didn't matter. I wasted so much time, money, effort, energy, collateral of some sort on something that was inconsequential, but at the time it just burnt it all up.
A wise man once told me that when you're looking at a problem, if you think to yourself, is this going to bother me in 5 years' time? And if the answer is no, then not to sweat it.
Well, Gopi, you and I talk all the time where it's like, is this the hill I'm going to die on as well, right? Like that's the other, that's more around relationships, but that's different as well, right?
I think we're going to run out of time for this session, but there's a lot still to be covered. You're trying to redefine how health is delivered, how information is captured. There's a lot more to talk about. I think we need to come back, but I want to finish on one thing. There's always been this rule, like you never work with your friends and your family, right? But when I look at both of you guys, and from the stories that we've shared today, it seems like you're surrounding yourself with as many friends as you can.
Well, my sister works in the business, right? She was our first hire.
So
I think you've got to prerequisite that with what you guys were saying before on the no ego piece. And I think sometimes with family members that can be a problem, but otherwise when you guys are set on your values, I think you couldn't think of anything better.
Yeah, but I want to know, like you've created success. Andrew had his whole family working in the business. You had your wife working at Go One, and you hired your sister as the first employee at One MRI. What's the secret of success? Because you seem to be either that whole saying is wrong or
no. I think look, honestly,
and maybe what you said is
honestly, it just depends, right? Like sometimes saying at a totality makes sense and it's true. Other times at the minutiae, it's not true. And so, yes, there are a lot of friends I've got that I wouldn't work with, but there's a bunch of friends that I love working with. One of the things, so we have an office in the Fortitude Valley and we have a couple of our friends who also share the office with us. And just because we love them having them around. And so I was showing Andrew and Vu this other area in the office, which was massive. And I was showing them about the idea. And then Vu was already chipping in by this other idea. And so we want to surround ourselves with the people that we like spending with, because I think it goes back to this notion Andrew always points to, is this concept called tripling down. It's kind of like if you can do 2 and 3 things at the same time that are like hitting 3 different verticals in your life, what a great time, right? Like that's efficiency. So for me, I work 80 hours a week, but I get to hang out with my friends. I get to hang out with my sister and I get to do cool work. And that's like, now I don't need to find social time on the weekend to like.
You're not really working 8 hours a week.
He is. I can say he's the CEO. He is.
I'm hanging out with my friends 80 hours a week.
What would you do otherwise? Yeah,
exactly. Exactly. And
you're redefining work.
Yeah. I think it just comes back to what is important to you and you'll find ways to do that. And it's social for me is a huge element, and same for you as well. And so as much of that, if I can incorporate it to work, my life only gets easier.
Yeah.
And I'll give you a bit of a logistical piece, right? Building where we're building in the high growth, in the high growth sort of innovation space, speed is incredibly important. The speed to grow a team is incredibly important. And one of the most important things to building a team is trust. So if you can rapidly acquire trust in a team, you'll be able to scale a team and scale a business faster, at least in the early stages. It doesn't necessarily work in the later stages, but in the early stages. And so at the end of the day, what it really comes back down to is hiring people you know and hiring people you have strong relationships with and therefore trust removes one of the biggest unknowns in hiring people and scaling a business, at least in the early stages. Yeah. Does that work for a team of 50, 100, 1,000? No. But in a team of 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, that curve, like that's
the inner circle.
The inner circle, because you just remove the variables.
That's right. And the inner circle can come in both ways, right? So we have a bunch of colleagues now who are some of our close friends. Yep. And they came into One MRI, and that's kind of how we met them. But I think it goes both ways. I think it's like, for me, it's like I'm building the corporate Australia that I always crave for. Yeah. And the corporate Australia that I always crave for is a company of people with no egos, who's willing to help each other out, but who also in 10 years time, just like you guys are playing poker, are still catching up. Like you guys are friends, you probably go work with each other again. I think it's just what you crave and aspire for.
I'll come to you in 10 years and ask how your corporate is going.
I think
exactly. That's the thing, right? Once you get to 1,000 staff and we've experienced this.
We are out of time. Let's wrap it up and come back again.
Let's do that. I think there's a lot more to talk about. And mate, thanks for coming in. And you guys are good to come back and have another chat with us.
Yeah, sounds good.
Awesome. Thank you both.
Thanks for having us, guys.
Cheers.
Hope you enjoyed this exciting episode of the Mastering Podcast. If you got value from today's conversation, hit that subscribe button now and share this episode with a friend. Until next time.